Good morning. My name is Radwan Ziadeh. I'm the Senior Fellow at the Arab Center, Washington, D.C. Thank you for joining us for this webinar entitled The Aftermath of the Syria-Turkey Earthquake, Humanitarian Crisis and Geopolitical Challenges. As you know, on February 6th, 7.8 magnitude earthquake struck southern Turkey and northern of Syria, which killed, right now, 46,000 people and leaving hundreds of thousands and more homeless and injured. Hundreds of aftershock, along with the political dynamics and instability of structure, have complicated the rescue efforts and compounding the problems facing an already devastated Syrian refugees community in Syria and Turkey. The earthquake is one of the most devastating natural disaster in decades in Syria. The grave humanitarian crisis of the Syrian people and the relief efforts have been embedded and delayed by political consideration and politicization of the humanitarian assistance. This morning event has been organized to discuss the situation in northern Syria and southern of Turkey, to unpack and comprehend the magnitude of the humanitarian catastrophe, to outline local and international responses, and to understand the reasons behind the failure of the rescue of efforts. Just to emphasize here that this panel will focus more on from the Syrian side, not the Turkish side. Also, that the vast majority of the victims are Turkish citizens, but it also we have a large number of the Syrian victims. According to the Syrian Network for Human Rights, right now, today we have more than 7,259 Syrians killed because of the earthquake. And we will discuss that later, but in numbers, we have 2,534 killed in the areas outside of the control of the Syria regime, which we call in the northern eastern part of Syria. And we have 394 killed in the areas under the control of the Syria regime, especially the cities of Hama, Aleppo, and Latakia. And we see actually the large difference between number of people being killed in both areas. Our panelists will address the political dimensions in both Syria and Turkey, as well as geopolitical factors in humanitarian action, the impact of sanctions, and the politicization of aid on domestic and international aid and relief services, and the challenges facing both immediate relief efforts and second wave post-disasters efforts. The discussion will include recommendation on how to effectively plan and implement relief and recovery going forward and to use applicable legal framework to support humanitarian action. We are honored to have with us a distinguished group of speakers who have been at the forefront of the earthquake response efforts, both in the US and in Syria. I will briefly introduce them in the speaking order. We have Raed Al-Saleh, who's the director of the Syria Civil Defense, also known as White Hamlets. The Syrians, they would like to call them the heroes. And then we have Muhammad Hamza, who's actually from the Syrian American Medical Association, SAMS, in its office in Gaziantep in Turkey. And we have Reem Connor. She's a board member of the Syrian American Council. She just returned from a trip into Syria. And we have Assaad Al Achi, who's a leading Syrian civil society activist and the executive director of Baytna, who's right now based in Brussels, Belgium. And finally, we have Wejdan Nassif. She's a feminist political activist, author, and the co-founder of the Syrian Women Political Movement. Welcome all of you, and thank you for being with us today. We'll give every speaker 10 minutes, followed by after all the speakers they have their prepared remarks, we'll have almost 30 minutes for Q&A. Please know that this webinar it's bilingual in both language, English and Arabic. If you English speaker, you have to press the button English to be able to hear the some of the speakers who speak in Arabic. And if you are an Arabic speaker, you have to click the button Arabic to be able to hear the translation. Thanks for the interpreters who with us, and they will offer simultaneous interpretation into both languages for duration the event. Um, um, I will turn over now into our panel, and we have, as I mentioned, we'll start with Raed, the director of the White Hamlet, who's been a leading figure in the rescue mission after the earthquake. And this is why the Syrians, they call them the heroes. They had great experience rescuing before the earthquake because of the barrel bombs who dropped on the Syrians since 2014. Now, Raed, the floor is yours.
I would like to welcome everyone, and Mr. Radwan, I'm so happy to be with you and with this invitation. I would like to thank you so much for this invitation, and thanks to all the friends. And I'm happy that I have a friend's honor to be with me, Mr. Assaad Al Achi. Well, thank you for this invitation. Actually, I would like to say, and to harness this 10 minutes and divide it and how this started and how we are in 10 years, we respond to this earthquake with our experience from the previous earthquakes that happened by the barrels that's been thrown by the regime on top of the Syrian people. And after that, I will talk about the earthquake, and I will talk about the other issues, the needs, and the response in the coming period that we can do a recovery from this earthquake, and we go back again to this region can back to normal. The civil defense also that from Syria, they start in 2012 and beginning of 2013, and they are, students, and they are electric experts, and they are men and women, and they have so many expertise, to serve their families and to serve their nation. They respond to, effectively to give civil service since the 2012s, and also they face all the type of the attacks and the regime. They, punish a group of people at that time who were against the regime. Those Syrians, effectively, they actually formed themselves in 2013 as groups, and also especially in areas that they were leader of groups in 25th of the October to sign the that this is the charter or the agreement. It's been signed by them for the special principles for the Syrian organization under the leadership of the civil Syrian defense, and also they were in Dara, in Damascus, and Hama, and Latakia, and Aleppo, and other places, and we were expanded to 9 governorates, and we had so many attempts, but because of ISIS in 2013 and 14 in those areas, they didn't allow us to continue working on those areas. Those young people, through times, they actually gained so many experiences, and also they got some help and aid from France and Qatar and Canada and UK and the United States, and from other local and institutions and civil organizations and all the Arab worlds, and was the main, in 2017 that we couldn't get the, Peace Colombia rewards. One of the people asked me, and they asked me, what do you feel that you lost this reward because you were nominated for this peace nominations? He said the biggest, the biggest thing that we won is the heart of the Syrians. They are a great nation and they deserve the best service in the world. Therefore, it's very tough to, have the satisfactions of those people. Syria now, it's the country that it's the, it's a 7,000 years history, and they were able to manage their country much better than the current regime that destroyed the economy, culturally. It's about 50 years so far. This regime destroyed the Syrian nation. The Syria is the historical place. Therefore, I would like to say that with the beginning of the earthquake, effectively, the civil defense also, they asked all the volunteers, there are about 3,070 people, among them so many women also. They did their best for the rescue. We did our efforts that we decided that we should do our, work perfectly. After 6 days, we had the opportunity that those people, they went back home. We slept in the same place where the earthquake happened, and we also only that we slept even on chairs, everywhere, anywhere, and we faced so many challenges. In this 10 years, we always had this aggression by the regime. They targeted us, and this actually made us stronger to be together. And there were two important factors that to deal with the shelling on us and the earthquake: the psychological factor that we faced also, at the same time that we had the physical factor that we had to be patient, and also we have to be stronger. And this always, I've been in the earthquake area, I said that everybody is looking at us. We can't just collapse. Maybe we can collapse and cry, hiding, not in front of the people, but we have to be strong, because people be strong when they see us strong. And also we let people can help. And this is actually after 10 years of the response to the earthquake, we noticed that how people, they stand beside us, all the civilians, every Syrian person, every human being in the world, they actually stand beside the white helmets. We had about 10 trucks, but we need more, 50. We had actually 60 trucks. Even the civilians, they gave us many equipments. Also, we had actually so many people, they helped and they brought all the kinds of equipments. We gave all this efforts, but factor that we are fighting with time, because people are under the rubbles, under debris, because we had, lifting the hope. See, it was so cold, was freezing, and this is actually affecting the people. They can lose their lives by time under the rubbles. We actually had the lack of equipments that develop, like if we had, like, for example, carbon measurement devices, we could actually do much better. We couldn't use those, the thing that very simple in the beginning of this process, because we didn't have any developed equipment. We actually grow up and we build our potentials in the lack of those equipments there. That's why we didn't depend on electricity or equipment. We depend on the hydraulic stuff, civil equipment, and muscles and efforts. This is what we did. This created so many things of challenges and so many other things that how you be able to do the best. And also the way that we dealt and our trainings, we were focusing that you are in the work field. We have to find anything can help you to rescue. Therefore, we did our best and our training and our expertise. We did our best to respond, to help people and to rescue people. And through time, we start working. And I can say so many stories, the heroic stories that faced us. As the best story that I faced and I lived, that it didn't, I couldn't control myself. So many people hear so many stories, but there was a young guy that he's still living in like a shock, actually. I visit him the second day in the Harab city. I talked with him, and he was actually, drilling about 10 meters in the bottom. And he said, anybody there? He said, we have somebody 14 years old. And I said, are they connecting with you? Yes, we talked with him and some other people under the debris. And the guy, he was crying, actually. I asked him, why are you crying? He said, we can see the best thing in our life, that we can rescue someone alive under the debris. So you are lucky. Why you are crying? I asked him. He said, I cannot, leave my family. If there is any problem, let me know. He said that my family under the debris, under the wreckage, that's what he said. That's why he was crying. And also he said, I have to finish so fast, and I have to save my family also. And also I told him that anything we do or any, by mistake, it might cause other lives, and we have to ask God to save this girl. She's 14 years old, and all the family can be saved too. Unfortunately, that his family, that they lost their lives, but we were succeeded to, take them out from the debris. So many stories that we heard from other people. There are some other stories, actually, maybe it's like miracles, but all this subject, the first, period, it's finished. And that was to save people under the debris. And the more difficult period came, which is the recovery from the earthquake. This is not easy to be recovered. We always heard that Turkey, that they collected $8 billion. Until now, we didn't get any money. We didn't even, I'm not talking about the recovery from the earthquake. The tents that we received is not enough for the families there in Syria. We have a lack of, place, water to drink, food, and the cholera. It's about 22 people lost their lives. The cholera, it will, be like pandemic if we don't have a good water to drink or clean water to drink. And also we are in need to medical, teams and medical equipments and medicines and hospitals, and those also people, they couldn't go to their home. Each person that doing surgeries, and they couldn't sleep. So many friends I visited, people, they are just sleeping, standing on their feet, and they are sleeping. People, they came from Europe to Syria. We thank them so much. They came on time, and it was so critical to need help. And also, we're still in the recovery period. Today, actually, that it's what we received now, it's only 10% that what the regime received. I asked from the, we were so sad about my family in Aleppo, because people are under those debris. Nobody can save them, because the Syrian regime are failure, and in managing the disasters. I asked Mark and Griffiths to have international protections to help the people from under debris, and you cannot hear someone under the this rubble debris, and you just can't ignore them, and you say, I couldn't hear them. The second thing that we have to work hard, and also the north of Syria, they need help, and they should get assistance as fast as possible, so they can rehabilitations of the sewage and water and schools, and so we don't have pandemics, and also rehabilitation of hospitals, and anything that people can go back and live normal. I'm sorry that I took long here, and I'm so sorry because I took too long to speak. Thank you.
No. Excellent, Raed. It's very, very powerful. Very powerful remarks. Thank you very much for also this powerful stories for the 14 years or girl. I cannot actually see how much difficult for you and for your team to work in such environment where your family members under the rubbles, and you have to continue to work to save lives. But it also you touch in very important point on the recovery with the second phase of the aftermath of the earthquake, and we will touch base on that. Now we'll move into Reem. Thank you, Reem, very much for joining us. You've been into Syria before you return back to the US. You'll be able actually to see in both eyes the role of SAC, Syrian American Organization, the leading organization in helping Syrians inside Syria. But at the same time, you see the aid from the first hand. The floor is yours.
Sure. Thank you, Radwan. Thank you, Raed, and thank you, panelists and Arab Center for having me. I feel humbled, to speak after Raed. I mean, he's a celebrity in my world, in my family. We love Raed, and we appreciate all the work he does. I would like to speak about twofold to what I'm going to speak about. First, as you mentioned, as an individual, when I left, my home here in the States to go to northern Syria, Turkey, I went as an individual. I did not go as a SAC member. However, the second fold, I also would like to, as a board member at SAC, what do we do at SAC? But there is a humanitarian aspect to what I would like to say, and then there is the advocacy aspect. So I'll start with the humanitarian aspect. Just a little bit of a background about me. My name is Reem Connor. I came to the States over 20 years ago, so I've been here well before the crisis. However, when the crisis hit, I just felt that pull to Syria. I grew up in Syria. I came here just to go to school, and I ended up staying, marrying an American who's Syrian in heart, as he says. But I grew up in Syria, so my pull to Syria is very strong, and I do speak Arabic, but I prefer to speak in English for the majority of English speaking on the call. A week ago, it's been a week since my return from Turkey. I have family and friends in Turkey. As every Syrian know, a lot of the influx for the Syrian refugees went either to Jordan, mainly to Turkey. So I have family and friends who live in Turkey, northern Turkey, in Gaziantep specifically, who fled the war in Syria. So I have not just, the connection to Turkey, but also I have actually family who were impacted by the earthquake. So when I heard the news, I saw videos from my cousins, my aunts who are there, my friends. I just felt the pull and the need to go and help if I can. Now, a lot of people, feel like, well, is it worth it for me to go? I'll probably make a donation online and it's better served, that way. And I understand, and I've done that where like, I can't, leave everything and go, and I'll just make a donation online. However, what I would say is, and I said that to my community and friends here, is like when you actually personally go, you make all these connections with the people on the ground, and the amplification of your visit come back here with you. So I decided to go because I wanted to raise fund, and I wanted to raise fund from my community. I don't have my own NGO, but there's plenty of great NGOs. But when I heard the news, I felt like I need to do something. My husband and I organized something over the weekend. We sent an email literally to our friends and community. And I told them, I'm going personally. If you like to have your money and have impact on the ground, make a donation, and I'll make sure we'll use it best. Especially because when I first heard of the earthquake and the complaint, my cousin actually runs a small NGO on the ground. It's called Olive Branch. And another good friend, Arwa Damon, who used to be a CNN journalist, and she started her own NGO, Inara, on the ground as well. They're both very small local NGOs that kind of fills in the gap that bigger organization don't do. Not that bigger organization not doing amazing work, but there is that little places where bigger NGOs feel like they need to go target big projects, but these local NGOs kind of fill in the gaps. We call them the fire engine, fill in the gaps. So I felt my help would be better used in those local organizations. So I just booked a trip, took as much cash as I can with me, and when they're ready to roll up my sleeves and work with them. And the first couple of days, I did feel like it was a drop in the ocean. It's like, what am I doing? Like the need is huge, and I'm not going to make an impact. But as the trip went, and as I felt like, we saw a family like Raed mentioned, he's seen so much suffering, but then there is one situation that kind of triggers you, and you feel like, if I can just help this person, I feel like I can go to sleep tonight and be okay. And similar to Raed's story, we saw so much suffering. It almost feels like Syrians are expert at suffering at this point. They suffer so much, they know how to handle it so well. And we walked into a makeshift camp. It wasn't even tents. This woman had a broken back from the earthquake. She's Syrian. She's young, she's probably in her 30s, laying down, looking like a ghost. She has kind of metal pieces coming out of her body because she went to a surgery, but she still needs to be recovered. And she looked at me in the eyes and was like, I just want a tent. Can you please provide me with a tent? Can you help us get a tent? And I walked out of, she had pieces of wood and covered with blankets. So she really didn't have a tent, but makeshift of a tent, and walked out of that tent feeling like, if I need to accomplish one thing, it would be that one thing, is to get her a tent, which we're still working on, not for the lack of money. We have money to get her a tent. It's just the access to tent now with the need is huge. But those are the story that if I didn't go personally, if I didn't decide to, raise money and tap into my community and go, I would not be able to help this specific woman. I'm a mother of two, so seeing her kids laying next to her, watching her suffer, that was my trigger. I was like, I can't, I have to help her. I have to help the kids to be in a better situation. Not that I alleviated all her pain, but if I can just do that one thing. So coming back here to the States, I feel like that's the story I want to tell people. Like, don't underestimate the impact you can do on the ground. When you go as an individual, as people were amazed that, I was there to help them. I was like, why wouldn't I? Everybody, if every family, I have plenty of cousins and brothers and sisters, our family is huge. If every family had one person who can raise money in their community and go and help, that drop becomes a bucket, and then we can help. So that's on the personal level on why I decided to go, and how your message could be powerful, especially that I want to mention one more thing. A lot of the aid worker in those impacted area, got impacted, meaning before the earthquake, we know a lot of NGOs in Gaziantep, Antakya, Hatay area, they were helping Syrian refugees who were impacted by the war in Syria. Now, those aid workers are impacted themselves. So it's like double whammy for the people who are there. So I was able to help the aid people so they can stand on their own and start helping again. So that was also an eye-opening, because typically you look at those 8 people, it's like, you're fine and you're here to help others, but really in this earthquake, they needed the help. A lot of them needed help. And most of the people we saw on the ground were Syrian. Not that we picked Syrian. We walk into a camp not knowing if we're going to find Syrian or Turkish. I think by virtue of Turkish, if you're a Turkish person live in that area, you probably have relative in other towns that when the earthquake hit, you were, quickly found another safe place to go to. However, Syrian, being refugees in Turkey, most of the camps you see are Syrian. We did encounter a few Turkish camps and we helped them because we were there, like Raed said, just to help the humans. We don't have a political affiliation. Anybody who needs help, we should be able to help. The other fold of what I would like to talk about is me as a board member of SAC, very proud to be part of SAC. I tend to, I don't want to use the word prefer, I enjoy the humanitarian work. It connects me with people. I love that work, but I am well enough, I know enough that the humanitarian work on its own, it's not enough. Without the advocacy work, without being in DC with our partners and making things happen, the humanitarian part will not happen. SAC is a great organization, Syrian American Council. They're in DC. Actually, just last night, I would like to talk about the resolution that they helped pass. Resolution 132, I took notes. I usually am not good with notes, but the resolution is very important that I wanted to make sure that we know, and you can all go look it up as well. But the resolution that was passed, 132, it's the first standalone resolution since Caesar, and it passed with huge majority. You wouldn't think that the House actually could agree on something, but they agreed on this resolution, 414 to 2. And those are the main point that the resolution says. The UN aid should be monitored so that Assad regime does not misuse it, as this is a big worry of Syria. We know how the regime operates. They operate as a mafia, so they have to skim all the aids that come and barely get anything to the affected areas. The US should protect the Syrian while upholding and implementation of Caesar. Assad cannot use the suffering of Syrian from the earthquake to get sanctions lifted. We see a little bit of normalization with Assad. It's very, very important. He's a war crime person. We cannot normalize relationship with Assad, and it's important to know helping the Syrian is a must, but we cannot help Assad and normalize. And one more thing, actually, when I was in Turkey, my husband and I live in Connecticut, he met with Senator Murphy, and we are pushing for a 50 million appropriation for stabilization of the northern Syria through education, rebuild. As Raed mentioned, these areas are impacted. They were already fragile and devastated from the war, and this earthquake just like finish those areas, and we really need to have money going there so people can go back to their homes. I know that was a lot. I probably went over my time, but I'll pause here if there's any questions.
No, thank you, Reem, very much. This is very important, the personal stories you have from your visit, and also the role of Syrian American organization doing advocacy at the Capitol Hill. We'll come to that later on, but we have to stay on the situation on the ground. We'll move into Muhammad Hamza, who the SAMS. SAMS is a leading also Syrian American organization working on providing aid to the Syrian refugees in Turkey and also in northern part of Syria. And I just need to clarify, because for the audience, Syria, after 13 years of civil war, is divided into 4 different entities, and there is no such connection or even access between those entities. There is 76% of the territory under the control of the Syrian regime, Assad government, and we have almost 14 to 17% in the area's control of Assad or BYG or Syrian Democratic Forces, who backed by the United States. And we have the city of Idlib under the control of Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, which is considered as a terrorist organization. And we have almost 10 to 11% in northern east of Syria, controlled by the Syrian opposition, backed by Turkey. And this is when we say that the earthquake hit, mostly we're talking about this 10% in the area in northern east, northern eastern of Syria. And for your information, there is some cities like Genderis, which hit hard, almost 90% of the buildings they're wiped out. And now this is why the medical aid, it was one of the key issues, not after the earthquake, but also before the earthquake, because of the politicization of the cross-border operation and the use of the veto in Russia, of Russia at the Security Council. Now we'll ask Mohammed to talk more about that, the difficulties of the humanitarian aid and the role of SAMS in this regard after the earthquake. Mohammed?
Yes, thanks, Dr. Radwan. Thanks for this opportunity to join you today. And before I start, I would just like to share the condolences of all SAMS members for the families of those who have lost their lives. All of Syria mourns these days, and we wish speedy recovery for all the wounded and all the ill. As a medical organization working in a very difficult situation like the one we are living right now, in an area that was suffering from humanitarian crisis for years and years, and barely getting out from one health crisis into another. There has been COVID that affected the whole world, and it was much more difficult in northwestern Syria. And we are still having cholera pandemic because of the inability to access safe and clean water. While we have, as in addition to this earthquake happening, most of the health facilities in the area are affected by continuous airstrikes and aerial attacks, mostly committed by the government of Syria and its allies in the previous years. At least we were able to count more than 750 attacks on health facilities in the previous year. And you can imagine how difficult it would be to operate while most of our facilities are already destroyed. The nature of the humanitarian response is also forcing most of us to respond barely to primary and secondary health needs in this context of emergency response, which means that you are unable to provide advanced services, you are unable to provide treatments that are not targeting the life-saving emergency needs. But this, after 13 years of crisis, is putting a huge percentage of the population, which are currently at 4.3 million in northwestern Syria, who are in need for support for things like non-communicable diseases. We're talking about hypertension, diabetes, and other kind of disease that usually exacerbate with the ongoing stress and poverty and the financial decline. With all of this background, you can imagine how difficult it was for all of us to have this earthquake. It not only happened, in Syria, but it also affected Turkey, where most of our offices and the operation of the remote management for the cross-border intervention is happening. And this is also has a severe impact on the ability of people to understand the size of the problem. Everybody was actually working, from their position, trying to act as quickly as possible. And SAMS, with their 33 facilities in northwestern Syria, from the first minute were, on full alert. We had major hospitals responding to the injuries that started to reach our ER departments, mostly carried out by our colleagues at the civil defense, and I appreciate all the effort that Raed was sharing with you, and also from all of those people who are, trying to take up people from under the rebels with their bare hands because of the lack of the assistance, and just running with them to the ER. It was horrific times. We've seen that sometimes in the past with airstrikes, but to have this on this size with all facilities was something else. Because usually you try to do referrals from one affected area to another just to distribute the pressure and ease it on the doctors who are intervening. But here it was not the case. I mean, everybody was affected. Many doctors were working in the operation rooms while they were very worried about the safety of their families, not only in Syria, but also in Turkey. One of our colleagues, the head of Bab al-Hawa Hospital, one of the most important hospitals in northwestern Syria, was operational in the hospital while his whole family was under the rebels in Hatay. He stayed in the hospital, working relentlessly and managing all of the injuries arriving. And unfortunately, his family, all of his family members, wives and children passed away a few days in Hatay, and he was not able to go there in the first place. And he was not the only one. So you can imagine how difficult it was for all of these people to respond. SAMS so far has treated more than 3,500 injury that arrived to its facility since the first day. 850 major surgery has been performed on people who arrived in critical situation. While the profile of injuries at the first days was basically, I would say, light to medium, and they were from people who did not stay relatively long under the rubbles. The longer the days passing out, the more severe the injuries that we are receiving. And it was very telling that we were not able to receive any meaningful medical assistance in the first few days that happened, after the crisis. Medical staff from the United States started arriving to Syria. Now we have medical missions who has been deployed, trying to support with different specialties and trying to help those people who has been in the operation rooms for days and unable to sleep. But the need is massive. We are still dealing with the results of what's happening. We had to reorganize some of the hospitals that we have created for the COVID-19 response, which means provided with ventilators, and turn them into an ICU units to receive those who has been, taken out from the surgeries, because we don't have many ICUs in the region. Raed pointed to the crush syndrome. Usually those people who stayed under the rubbles for a long period of time and taken out might be having some renal failure, and they would need hemodialysis. The problem is most of the supplies for hemodialysis was almost non-available in stock when the earthquake happens. And by the time that we were starting to procure and asking WHO and different people to provide that, we have lost some precious days. Even now, putting these equipments within the ICU themselves, I mean, to have ICUs that are equipped with dialysis units was not an easy task. Doctors from different hospitals in the United States was on the tele-ICU services, helping their colleagues to respond to these complicated cases and providing guidances on which medication they should provide and what things that they should be support. We have many children that they are still in the intensive care, sometimes unconscious, who have lost all of their families, and they are still unaware of the tragedy that happened to them. Some of them might be even losing some of their limbs, and we don't know yet exactly how these children will be taken care of. The psychological impact is huge, and the area has been already suffering from the terror of being bombarded over and over and over again. Even yesterday, by the way, we received 3 injuries at 2 hospitals of SAMS after the shelling that came out from the government forces on different areas through the Idlib-Bab al-Hawa highway. People were terrified. 3 injuries of little girl and her mom and 1 father. We received injuries from car accidents of those who were very afraid when the shelling happened, because people are in a state of panic. And by the way, when the second earthquake happened, most of the injuries that we received were not due to the rubbles, were due to people who threw themselves out of the windows or out of the balconies because they didn't want to experience what happened before. We received a lady with her children who was buried twice under the rubble, the first time and the second time, knowing that when she gave birth and her child was in a very difficult situation, yet with the huge load on the hospitals, she had to be discharged. She went to a place where it was not very well safe, and because there was not enough tents and no good shelters, she was buried again. Once again, we were receiving her once again after taken out by the civil defense. I don't want to take long of your time, but I can speak for long about what's happening. Now, the only thing that is still concerning me, honestly, is the important decrease in the ability to provide referrals to Turkey. Our area, and because of what I have mentioned, was dependent on referral to Turkey for advanced treatments. I'm talking about patients with cancer, patients who would need advanced cardiovascular surgeries, things like that. We're talking about 10,000 referral per year that was happening to the Turkish hospitals. Unfortunately, these hospitals now are even overwhelmed or partially demolished as well. And now we are having a situation where we are seeing that for at least a year, referral to Turkey could be very challenging. And we should be finding alternatives for these treatments, for these lacking services that we were not able to establish in Northwest Syria for years and years now. We need to find a solution with radiotherapy, which is an expensive equipment establishment to provide that for people with cancer. We need to establish some advanced services for advanced surgeries and advanced diagnostics tools. These are things that preoccupies us at the medium and the long run, while we're still dealing with the outcomes of the earthquake in the first place. Back to you, Dr. Radwan.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mohammed. This is a very detailed description about exactly the situation, the pressure that the medical field has felt during the first and the second earthquake, and the role that SAMS and other organizations played an important. Because as Syrians, we felt abandoned from the international community, and this is 5 days that Raed mentioned after the earthquake. From the earthquake hit on February 6th, the first aid convoy crossed the border into Syria was in 11. Almost 5 days. In those days, if we got more medical aid, if we got more large equipment that Raed mentioned before, if it will be saved life. And that's maybe allowed for the Assistant Secretary General Martin Griffiths to express his the feeling, the abundance of the Syrian from the international community at the Security Council meeting. And that's a great segue into the second point we're trying to discuss with Assaad. Assaad, being leading human rights activist, spent years in Gaziantep, where only few knows that large number of the victims in Turkey are Syrians, because there's at least 1 million Syrians lived in Gaziantep. And I think Dr. Mohammed mentioned that many Syrians who work on the northern part of Syria, they have families in southern of Turkey got affected. But it also, if you touch that, Assaad, in your remark, but also the role of the European Union, especially when we move into the second discussion, which the recovery stage. The European Union was first to announce a huge aid conference to Syria and Turkey. We don't know how the politics will work with the different four entities I mentioned before, and different balances in power, and of course in receiving the aid, and the issue of sanctions. But the best one to deal with all this issue, Assaad, floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Dr. Radwan, and thank you very much for the Arab Center in DC for the opportunity. As you mentioned, Dr. Radwan, a lot of the Syrian organizations, and I think it was told by my friend Muhammad, have their headquarters or their main operation centers in Gaziantep, in Hatay, in Reyhanli, which are the most affected cities by the earthquake. What is not mentioned when we talk about the statistics and the number of deaths is how many Syrians actually died in Turkey. So there are a lot of Syrians, obviously, that died in the northwest of Syria. There are a lot of Syrians that died in government-controlled areas, in Jabli, in Latakia, in Hama, in Aleppo. But there are about 6,000 Syrians that died in Turkey. And although the border was officially closed after the earthquake and no aid convoys could go in, we all saw the convoys of bodies being transported from Turkey into Syria to be buried in Syria. So apparently death does not stop at the border, but humanitarian aid does. And that's why basically there is a strong feeling that Syrians were left alone to die. We're left alone to die not only in Syria, but also we're left alone to die in Turkey. And there are many accounts of discriminatory approaches to the search and rescue that was conducted in the several cities of southern Turkey, Syrians not being able to reach to the USAR teams, and also the restrictions that have been put by the Turkish government, starting with not offering the evacuation flights to Syrians by limiting them to Turkish citizens, moving to imposing a time frame on the allowance for Syrians under temporary protection to be able to go out of the 11 provinces, affected provinces in southern Turkey. So that time limit is 60 days. So now Syrians are only allowed out of Gaziantep, Hatay, etc. Syrians under temporary protection, of course, only for 60 days, and they have to register themselves. So it's a double tragedy, basically, in terms of, one, the humanitarian cost, the human cost on Syrians in Turkey, but also all the policies that the Turkish government is putting at the moment, and the reactions also by the population. So it's not a beautiful time to be a Syrian in southern Turkey at the moment. and all my support to all my friends in Gaziantep, in Hatay, in Rehanla, in Adiyaman, in Shamli-Urfa, in Eladzig, and in the different areas that have been hit by the earthquake in southern Turkey. Moving on to the policy side, and I think that would be the more important side. What this earthquake has proven is we cannot rely on one hub only in Gaziantep to respond to a major catastrophe that could hit northern Syria. The UN needs to come up with an alternate model. All modalities need to be explored. All access points need to be invested in. And there are many options there, including, but not limited to, obviously, reauthorizing or reopening, not reauthorizing, reopening Yarubiya border crossing with Iraq, and making Erbil a secondary hub, not the main hub. Turkey will always be the main hub to access the northwest of the country, but we need a secondary one. And as the convoy that was done by the people of Deir ez-Zor, the people of Hasaka, and the people of Raqqa prove, is that when there is a humanitarian need and when there is a political will, humanitarian convoys can cross the line between the northeast of the country and the northwest of the country. And this is something that we need to capitalize on. For the future of the country, for the unity of Syria and its people, we have proven that when it's peer-to-peer, when it's people-to-people, access is possible, and therefore that needs to be exploited and explored to its maximum level. The major party that failed the Syrians is the United Nations, and that should be said as is. The UN has failed Syrians. The UN has left Syrians to die alone for at least 72 hours, and the most critical 72 hours post the earthquake. UNDAC was not activated, INSARAG was not activated. Those are two mechanisms available for the UN to respond to a catastrophe of the scale of an earthquake, to mobilize international rescue teams to respond to a catastrophe area, and have not been used by the UN. So although Barton Griffith offered his apologies, unfortunately his apologies are not going to bring people who died under the rubble. So we need a serious investigation on what happened in those first 72 hours and why why those teams were not mobilized for Syria, for all of Syria, not only for the northwest, but also for Jabli, also for Aleppo, also for Latakia, also for Hama. Why these teams were not mobilized, this remains a mystery to me until today. And using the sovereignty card or using sanctions as a scapegoat for the failure of the UN is absolutely unacceptable. All sanction regimes, including the most severe ones, Caesar Act and others, have wide, far-reaching humanitarian exemptions in them. It's not acceptable for the UN to use sanctions as a reason for failure to deliver. And plus the far-reaching humanitarian exemptions, the UN itself has specific exemptions within all the different sanction regimes. So this is absolutely not an acceptable excuse. We've all seen the planes land in Aleppo airport. We've seen the planes land in Damascus airport before the General License 23 was issued by the US government, before the waiver was issued from the EU, and before the UK also clarified their sanction regime. So none of those excuses are acceptable anymore, and sanctions do not impede humanitarian immediate emergency response. They do not. Do they make life more difficult in the midterm and the long term? Absolutely, they do. And there we can have a conversation. But in an emergency situation for emergency response, there is nothing in those sanctions that limit the ability of the UN or other international organizations to respond to an immediate catastrophic scenario like the one we saw with the earthquake. So we seriously need a serious investigation on the UN mechanism. And that makes me doubtful as well about what you mentioned, Dr. Radwan, about the EU conference and whether all of that aid will go to the UN. Because to be honest, I don't feel safe for all of that money to go to the UN when I've seen the failure of the UN in the first 72 hours. We need an international monitoring mechanism to verify where that money is going. And thank you for the US, the Syrian American community for the work they've been doing on Resolution 132, as was mentioned by Reem. This is quite important for member states of the UN to step up and say, hold on, you are accountable for that money. You are accountable to us as donor governments to the UN, but you're also accountable to the affected populations. And we need to put that accountability mechanism together. We need that accountability mechanism to be in place to make sure that whatever humanitarian aid is going to be distributed mid-term and long-term does respond to the need of the people, is not politicized, is not used by the Assad regime, and reach where it's needed rather than when it is possible. And that's another challenge with the UN. The UN will always use access as an excuse that, well, we only were able to access this area because it's possible. But that's not where most of the need is. The need is elsewhere. So we want a need-based response rather than an access-based response to this tragedy. And last but not least, in terms of the situation of Syrian refugees in Turkey, that conference, the EU conference, can also be used as leverage to demand the Turkish government to respect the rights of Syrian refugees, to protect the Syrian refugees, and to basically recognize that the protection failures of the government in the first 10 days after the earthquake. There was a huge failure from the Turkish government in providing that protection mandate, although those Syrians supposedly are under temporary protection. So aid should be conditioned, not obviously on political grounds, but aid should be conditioned on human rights, respect of human rights, respect of the people, and respect of the need, and therefore reaching as many people as possible. Those would be, my quick recommendations on how to move forward, and also on how to best use the announced EU conference, although there's a lot of still smog on when it's going to happen and who will it be targeting. The last thing I wanted to mention is this is not the time for humanitarian diplomacy with Bashar al-Assad. Bashar al-Assad was the first earthquake for Syrians, exactly as my dear friend Raed said. He was the main earthquake, and all that he has done with his barrel bombs. Let's not forget that this is a president that used chemical weapons against his own people. Therefore, he used weapons of mass destruction against his own people. That was an excuse good enough to invade Iraq in 2003, when actually it turned out that Saddam Hussein did not have weapons of mass destruction. We know Bashar al-Assad has weapons of mass destruction. We know that he used them against his own people. The OPCW has confirmed it with its latest ITT report, confirming the identity of the body that through the chemical agent sarin on Ma'arrat al-Nu'man. So with all that evidence, this is really not the time to open up to a butcher that is basically going to utilize the human suffering of his own people, including people that are under his control in Aleppo, in Latakia, in Jabla, and in Hama, to re-legitimize himself, caring less about how these people are being saved. So my last word, this is not the time for humanitarian diplomacy. Thank you very much.
Excellent, Assaad. Very good policy recommendations. And that's what's a matter right now because we've seen all of these Arab diplomats visiting Damascus and meeting with Bashar al-Assad, where actually they should have a more honest debate discussion how to help the Syrian people, not to help the Syrian dictator. Last but not least, we are thrilled to have with us Wejdan. She's a leading woman activist, and she participated in the UN um, negotiation. We're happy to hear from her about the role of women because women, children are the most effective population in during the war and then of course during the earthquake. And we always number of single moms in northern part of Syria, I think doubled right now. And those are the most difficult because she has to take care of her kids and the family. And then also she has to work full time to be able to do that. Wajdan, floor is yours.
I am, trying to do my best to brief of what I'm going to talk, of how these women organizations dealt with the catastrophe of the earthquake and also the women political movement. And also, I will give an idea how was our vision of post disaster and what are the new challenges, especially from our perspective as women. And we know the main issue that fall on the marginalized and vulnerable people, children's, women's, sick people, and the people with special needs, and also this vulnerable people, especially women's. And the previous years, we noticed that how this violence was against the more than half of the Syrian people because of the geopolitical issues and of the current crisis and the conflicts. And also there's a lack of legal framework to protect people and protect women. And this is actually more like a discriminated legal framework. And as you know, this earthquake has affected everybody. And the first day we were in shock, but the second day we gathered ourselves and as women organizations and the movements of women too, and also we did our best and we send we ask all the countries to help and to we had the call more than 40 organizations, and we demanded to have an immediate aid, medical aid, humanitarian aid, and also equipments, send equipments to the affected areas, and also through all the border crossings and with no exceptions, and take all the procedures and stop all this complicated issues to let all this aid, reach the people, the needy people, and immediate assistance. We were in the emergency room to respond to the earthquake. We collect all the informations about the affected areas, and we transfer all the voice of the people, the needy people. And we made so many meetings with many countries in the security councils, and also we gave them all the informations of the situations. We had so many colleagues in the north, west of Syria and in south of Turkey. And today we are in a new period post the recovery of the earthquake. And unfortunately, that so many voices that are talking about the psychological recovery, this physical recovery, and they're suffering actually. And the most important thing that there was a delay of the UN and some other countries to help the Syrian people. And there was like, unfortunately, the Syrian issue, it was politicized. Also, the Syrian people, also, all of them, they send help, they send assistance, no matter who they are. And all the Syrians, men and women, did their best to close that gap of the, especially unfortunately, especially by the response, like so many people, that are individuals, they did their best, and sometimes they face so much troubles. Some, they said that you have to do your aid through like official channels, and we heard from women in Latakia that many doctors, they tried to transfer the injured and they helped them by their own car. They've been threatened in Latakia, but we understand that this is the magnitude of this situation is so big, and this catastrophe need a response from the countries. They have capabilities, and the response of the organization should be immediate, and maybe they cannot be able to cover everything, and we understand that this pressure should by the United Nations and the European governments, that they gave help to Turkey, but at the same time they should also, we can guarantee help and aid to all the victims, especially in the north west of Syria. It's so important for us that we are always focusing on our demands to have international UN mechanisms, and through organizations, international institutions, they work in this field, and should be monitoring and periodic reports of this, aid and assistance. And we are, as women movements and organizations, in the beginning, we indicated that we try to highlight the needs of the women's and children's, and those needs of women's should be like health, and should be priority among all the financial and other assistance and other aids, and should application or apply all the legal frames of this relief and protect women. And also this should guarantee that participate women's or women participations also to protect women, to avoid also and the gathering that women should not be also assaulted or what's happening in the camps. And also we start hearing on these issues and these stories. We always fearing that to have violence against women. We noticed that previously in the period of time of the fighting in Syria, and the shelter and other things for women is important. And sometimes things that they don't take women issues into considerations, and privacy for women is important. And there's a lack of for example, not to give them anything, like for example, have some medical advice within this aid. And also that we heard so many harassment against women, and because there's a lack of security, and also there is some so many other things that happen, provoke things because of this food basket. And also this should those aid take into considerations the gender sensitivity. And also, as you know, women are alone, and so many women are alone, and they cannot able to get this food basket. And our imaginations, so many things that especially for the shelters for women. There's so many Syrian families without any shelters. They are all gathered in one place, and some families only one tent is like a dream to them. And we know that human should save himself or herself and to live, and that is the target, is to live. And therefore, we heard so many discriminations in Turkey and we are fearing that this is going to be spread and be uncontrolled, especially the Syrians, men and women in Turkey. They all already have some fears of that, and we have to take that into considerations. Also, we have to blame Assad. Also said that, and we have to highlight that that's a Brussels conference for relief. Will be in March, and maybe there is also they're going to be a fund be formed to help Syrian people, and there should be a response to that. And Turkey should be a response also, and include all the Syrians who are suffered, and those aids should not be politicized. And it's very important to see the mechanisms to be monitored, all the aid that reached everyone. And it's those aids is not going to go to the regime only. This is very important to be monitored, and we should gather on that. And we emphasize at the end that we are that all aid should also help the women as a priority, and should monitor, also there is a monitoring mechanisms of that. And thank you so much. And I'm apologizing for the technical issue.
No, thank you very much. This is very an important perspective. My question to you, Raed. Yesterday, I was listening to an interview with some of the Libyan officials who applaud the white helmets of their role in Syria, and ask actually to duplicate the organization in many other Arab countries because the bravery you had. My question to you about the politicization of the aid. What's happened because of the geopolitical dimension of the Syrian conflict? It became now internationalized conflict. The US involved, Russia involved, and many regional actors are involved in the conflict. And of course, that makes the humanitarian aid much more complicated. Now we have a tragedy like an earthquake, which affects Syrian without any political affiliation. Do you think this is a good time for have a real debate and conversation about the future of the humanitarian assistance to Syria, with everyone as victims, no matter the region you live in, but you are a victim because you got hit by an earthquake. What's your take on that, right?
Actually, I would like to apologize. I cannot open the camera because I'm actually traveling right now. The situation and the subject of politicizations of the aid, it's, it's been, Syrians are suffering from that for a long time when renewing the cross-border aid in the security councils. So who are discussing with that are politicians and not anyone else. So to get that subject to reach the aid to the north, actually, east, this is a politicization of the aid. And today, all the Syrian institutions, and many of them, and the white helmet, they are participating in negotiations in the past December, to have resolutions from the security councils. And today, the United Nations, when they wait about 7 days for Bashar al-Assad to that representative of the, he said, like, we thank you, Mr. President. And when they are thanking Bashar al-Assad, they could do much better than that. According to the study of 37 of this legal UK institutions, that they had a research about 170 page with the alliance of United States, and also those people in the United States, they are able to send the aid to the north of Syria. They waited 7 days, actually, to have a meeting, or maybe the Security Councils. Today, we demand that not to use the aid to have political, gains. And that's what we noticed. And we noticed what is the diplomacy of that. The main terminology, it's been called by the intellectual, it's the diplomacy of earthquake. So today, that we have to discuss serious discussions, reality discussions, and the leadership, under the leadership of the UN, to reach the aid to the Syrian people without any politicizations, and also to go back to the Security Councils, because when the resolutions in the hand of the the Security Councils, this is the start of the politicizations of the aid.
Thank you, Raed. We have only 5 minutes left. We got too many questions. I will address some of the questions, and appreciate of the panelists if they will have very brief response. For Assaad, a question from Michael. Could you please mention the 2 UN mechanisms for disaster response which they did not mobilize?
Yes, it's UNDAC and INSARAG. Both mechanisms were mobilized for Turkey, but not extended to Syria. So UNDAC and INSARAG.
Excellent. Thank you, Assaad. A question to Reem. How will this tragedy affect Turkey policy regarding the Syrian refugees in Turkey? And then, of course, the Turkish intervention in northern part of Syria.
It's a definitely complicated situation, and I know the time is tight. I would just say right now, Turkey has their own crisis as well, and we have to keep that in mind. So their priority is not going to be the Syrian people, the Syrian crisis. And part of me understands why, but that's why we as activists, advocates, we need to work harder to keep the Syrian on everyone's mind, because they will not be on the Turkish government's mind. I think our work now is double to bring us back to the picture. So I think Turkey has their hands full, and that's going to be negatively impacting the Syrian. I don't think there'll be major policy changes towards the Syrian, but they're definitely not going to have Syrians in mind at the moment.
Okay, excellent, Reem. Thank you. A question to Dr. Mohammed. Why weren't the building in northern Syria protected from the earthquakes? Is this because of the regime corruption?
Well, I mean, definitely after decades of the rule of a corrupted system, you can expect that even the civil code would not be respected while, establishing buildings in different areas. But also, I mean, the continuous bombardments over the years for crowded and populated areas has also severely affected, the status of the foundations of many of the buildings. And unfortunately, in many of the videos that we are seeing coming out from Eastern Aleppo, for example, and other cities where we are seeing all of these UN officials, pointing out to the aftermath of the earthquake. Actually, these are not resulted from the earthquake itself. These were the results of previous attacks and bombardments that affected these buildings. And many of those buildings, by the way, are the ones who were demolished through this earthquake. So yeah, there's a connection.
Thank you, Dr. Mohammed. And a question to Wejdan. Why doesn't the US or the UN simply fly aid from neighboring countries to northern Syria? The US has bases in Iraq and Turkey, which can use for that purpose. Wejdan or Assaad?
Well, I mean, this is an excellent question. It's a question to the U.S. administration more than to us as Syrian NGOs. But all I can say there is, whenever there is a political will to do stuff, then it can be done. And we've seen airdrops in Syria before in two instances. The first time, it was a World Food Program airdrop during the besieging of Deir ez-Zor by the so-called Islamic State. And the second time is when the international coalition airdropped ammunition and armament to the YPG during the Kobani siege by also the Islamic State.
Yes, excellent. The U.S. announced $185 million assistance to Turkey and Syria. We don't know exactly what's the amount of money will go into Turkey and the amount will go into Syria. But the U.S. Secretary of State Blinken visited southern Turkey and met with the delegation from the White Hamlet. And this is still the U.S. play a critical role, of course, through the different legislation from the Congress, asking for more monitoring or an evaluation of the aid process into the UN. Our times is up right now. I would like to thank each one of the panelists. We have excellent contribution, detailed overview into the situation in Syria, and also into we touch base on the policies and recommendations affect the aftermath of the Syria earthquake or the recovery phase. Thank you for all the audience who stayed with us for 1 hour and a half. And for more information or political analysis, please visit the website of Arab Center of Washington, D.C. Thank you very much for everyone. Thank you.